Happy Friday everyone, and welcome back to another episode of my series Autumn, where I showcase produce of the autumn months. And this week it's all about mushrooms. I absolutely love mushrooms. You get so many different kinds, different textures, different flavors. They're amazing. And so we are making today the ultimate mushroom pie. It's a bit of a long one, so strap in. It's definitely more of a weekend bake, but it's so cozy, so warming, and so delicious. I've started by making my own puff pastry. This is a rough puff pastry recipe, and I've followed the Boy Who Bakes, which I've linked in the caption below, so go check that one out. He uses alcohol to lower the water content and to ensure some really nice crispy layering. So highly recommend that one. It's so buttery, it does make a big difference, and I've used whiskey, which goes so well with mushrooms. But I use shop-bought pastry most of the time, and I wouldn't blame you for doing the same. So if you're buying pastry, then skip ahead to 3 minutes 39 on this video where I start to make the filling, and you can just ignore this first bit where I'm rolling and layering. But yes, here we go. So to start off with our pastry, I'm adding an obscene amount of salted butter to some flour, and then I'm going to toss that cold butter through the flour and flatten each lump down so they're all nice and flat, and mix that in. Then I'm going to hydrate it, first with some whiskey and then with some ice cold water. I've actually put a tub of water in the freezer ahead of making the pastry to make sure it's super cold. And you want to make sure all your flour is nicely hydrated, and take it really slowly so that you don't add too much liquid, because you want to keep this as dry as possible to get as many layers as you can. Then once that's all nicely hydrated, you can put it out onto your bench top. Make sure you've not missed any kind of dry spots or lumps of flour, and then you kind of want to lump it together with a benchtop scraper and get it into a nice rectangle shape. Put it in some cling film and kind of bash it together into shape so that you're not overworking it, but you're just helping it combine a little bit. So then we pop it in the fridge for about half an hour to make sure it stays nice and cold. Even pop it in the freezer if you're a bit worried. We just want to make sure the butter is always cold and not melting, and that will ensure we get layers and a really nice puff. Get those crispy layers. So keep the butter cold. Once that's been in the fridge for a bit, you take it out, roll it out thinly, and then cut it into 4 squares and layer that up, and then bash it back into a rectangle, put it back in the fridge, half an hour again, and we're going to do that about 3 times until we have formed all those nice layers, and then we are good to go. So I'm working away, rolling out my pastry and layering those sheets of pastry with the cold butter, so that essentially in the end you'll have lots of layers of dough and lots of layers of cold butter all in between each other. And because the butter hasn't melted into the pastry, instead it melts between layers of pastry and helps those then crisp up, and you get those gaps, and that's what makes it delicious, buttery and crispy. Now that's done, it can rest in the fridge until I'm ready, and in the meantime I'm moving on to the filling. So the aim here is to add as much rich, savoury umaminess as possible so that this filling is super cozy, super warming for these cold autumn months. And let's face it, it's basically autumn now, so we need all the warmth we can get. Now I'm going to start by making my own veg stock, and don't worry, unlike the puff pastry, this is a lot easier than it sounds. So I'm starting off with some porcini mushroom, which I absolutely swear by for anything veggie to give it that rich meatiness and savouriness. So rehydrating those in a litre of boiling water and leaving it to the side while I prep my veg. So the reason I'm making my own veg stock here is because I'm prepping lots of veg, and so I've got lots of scraps, and instead of just putting those straight into the bin, I'm gonna get as much from them as I can. So I'm keeping the scraps, and that's what I'm going to make the stock out of. So for my onions, celery, leeks and carrots, I'm just starting by prepping those by peeling, top and tailing them, and that's going into a pan, rinsing those, and that's going to be my base. with the garlic, if there's a few tiny cloves, then I'm propping those in there as well and just keeping those big ones to put into the actual filling. And as the title suggests, I'm using a whole load of mushrooms in this, so just cleaning those up a bit, removing the tail, peeling them when necessary, and all of that is going into our stock as well. Look at all those beautiful trimmings. Yum. So coat them in some water, add thyme and some black peppercorns, and then put it on to simmer. It should take about 30 minutes and you'll see it'll have changed colour to a beautiful dark brown, all infused. That's when we can strain in our porcini mushroom water, but make sure to keep the porcinis because they're going in our filling as well. Now for the star of the show, our mushrooms. I've got a whole mix of different kind. I'm using some king oyster, some oysters, some shiitake, and some chestnut mushrooms, so I can get a bunch of different flavors and textures, but obviously you can just use one kind of mushroom as well and it will still be absolutely delicious. Now the key to flavor here and slight meatiness is to take your time and brown the mushrooms in small batches. Dry, hot pan. Just make sure that none of them are overlapping and leave them to brown nicely. Give them a little shake and then move on to the next batch. Cut them up in different shapes and sizes so you get nice different variations in texture. So I'm tearing the oyster, chopping the shiitakes into quarters, and then the normal chestnuts I'm going really fine with them, doing what's called an émincé in French. So once all of that is done, I can move on to the base of my filling. So in the same pan, I'm adding rapeseed oil and butter, and then the mirepoix prepped veg. So that's onion, garlic, celery, and carrots. And I'm leaving that to sweat off for a good 10 minutes on a medium-low heat. Then I'm adding the leeks, which I've chopped into small centimetre rounds, and doing the same, sweating off again before adding a tin of butterbeans drained and a tin of green lentils drained. Then I'm going to add some flour and stir that in. That's formed a roux with the butter that we put in at the start and the oil, and so that will help thicken the filling when we add our stock. Once my flour's stirred in nicely, I'm straining all the stock into the pan and stirring it up until it's thickened on a medium heat. And once that's all done, we can turn the heat off, leave that to start cooling down, and in the meantime stir in lots of additional bits to layer those flavors and make sure this is the absolute ultimate mushroom pie. So I'm going in with some Dijon mustard, some Marmite, a dash of Worcestershire sauce, a dash of soy sauce, some red currant jelly, some lemon juice, some crème fraiche, and have I forgotten it? Oh, parsley, and I'm putting in some grana padano cheese, but that's optional. If you want to make this vegan, then swap it out for some nutritional yeast, for instance, and obviously use vegan butter as well earlier, and just maybe put some oat milk instead of the crème fraiche. That should be really nice. And that's it. Our filling is delicious. Just leave that to cool. Then for the puff pastry top, I'm rolling out half of my puff pastry, keeping the rest in the freezer ready for next time so I don't have to go through the whole palaver again. So this bit is just getting rolled out thinly to about 1 centimetre thick, nicely rectangular so it fits over my pie. Then I'm tucking in the edges and I'm gonna crimp those tucked in edges. So to crimp, there's lots of different methods. I like to use the one where you use 2 fingers from one hand and 1 finger from the other hand to push a bit of the pastry into the dent from the 2 fingers, if that makes sense. Hopefully the video helps with that as well. It doesn't need to look nice though. At the end of the day, this one is all about comfort and coziness. Ignore the woodland creatures I put on mine. That was a complete waste of time. It was just a slow Sunday and I wanted to experiment. Don't bother with that. Prop it in the oven for about an hour at 180 degrees until you've got a lovely golden crispy top, and just tuck in and enjoy.